This video presentation has been classified by the ABC as M. It contains material that is not recommended for persons under 15 years.
So, how long was Paul Barry the presenter of the show? What type of presenter was he?
Yeah, I mean, Paul was a very courageous presenter. I remember even before the program went to air, we were already in trouble with ABC management. They wanted us to take a segment out of the titles of the program because we were showing this confrontation between John Safran and Ray Martin that had been quite an embarrassment to the ABC over the years. It's something that had actually already appeared on Media Watch before inside the program, and we wanted to put it into the titles, and there was a whole kerfuffle because management were, just in a tiz about having this little segment in our titles. In the end, we said, okay, we agree, we'll take that out of the titles, but we also did a story about the fact that management had forced us to take it out of the titles, and I guess that's a constant feature of Media Watch, sort of skirting that line between independence and being inside the ABC.
Yeah, I guess that leads me to another question. Why is it important that a program like Media Watch not only criticises commercial enterprises but the ABC? Why is it so vital?
If Media Watch only criticised other networks, then I think the program would just have no credibility at all. Media Watch has to be ready to criticise the ABC just as vigorously as anyone else in order to maintain its status among the viewers. People have to believe that, we'll take on our own colleagues, we'll take on the ABC, we'll take on our own bosses just as willingly as we'll take on Ray Martin or Channel 9 or The Australian or the Daily Telegraph or the Adelaide Advertiser. It's essential to the credibility of the program.
Now getting to more serious things, can you tell me what the mood was like for the last episode prior to you going to air? Like, there'd been big cuts to the ABC, people had turned out in their thousands to the Domain to protest against those cuts, and there was a very unpopular ABC managing director at the time, John Shire. So I'm just trying to set the mood before we go into that section.
I think that around that time two things came together as far as Media Watch was concerned. We'd sent a letter to the head of ABC Television, Gail Jarvis, a Jonathan Shire appointee, demanding that she be more supportive of the program. And we were also interviewing Donald McDonald, the chairman of the ABC, about what was happening in the ABC. Now, our interview really wasn't out of the ordinary compared to what else was happening in the media. Everyone was criticising Jonathan Shire. No one really had any faith in his ability to lead the public broadcaster. But we put those points directly to Donald McDonald, and we presented that on the ABC. And my view was that we'd be able to do that. I really did think that they wouldn't have the guts to axe Media Watch. But I was wrong. When my wife saw that program, she said, "You're fucked. They're going to fire you." I didn't believe it. I thought that the public support out there was so solid that there's no way that they could get rid of Media Watch. Well, she was right. We were axed. But on the other hand, the public support meant that I think Shire's decision to get rid of Media Watch was, one of the nails in his own coffin. I was shocked that Media Watch was axed. I really hadn't expected that they'd have the guts to cancel the program. And so, after that, I didn't really expect it would come back. But, it did. I mean, it maintained its popularity. The other programs that they put in its place weren't as popular, weren't as successful. And so, 12 months later, they asked us to bring the program back. When Media Watch came back, David Marr was the presenter, and he presented for the next 3 years. He had a long and distinguished career as a print journalist and also as a broadcaster on radio and on ABC TV. David brought enormous passion to Media Watch and fantastic performance. I think, in a way, there's always been an actor hiding in David Marr, and I think one of the things that was remarkable was how he developed over the time and how much pleasure he took in his performances and how much pleasure he gave to the people who watched him too.
What were the highlights, do you think, of the year of those 3 years under David?
I think the highlights with David So, I think the highlights of David's time at Media Watch was probably Cash for Comment too. I mean, over those 3 years, we pursued the issues that had been raised by Cash for Comment. We pursued what was happening with Alan Jones, what was happening with John Laws, and eventually, we uncovered the documents that showed that Cash for Comment hadn't ended with the ABA inquiry. It hadn't ended back in 2000. It was continuing right through the early part of this century. Going back to the early 90s, and then over the next 10, 15 years, people like John Laws and Alan Jones became, the most powerful media figures in the country. Talkback radio was the Prime Minister's first choice for making announcements. That's where the politicians went. And it started before John Howard, but it continued on all through his time at government. And it meant that someone like Alan Jones became the most powerful broadcaster in the country. So naturally, Alan Jones, John Laws, they were prime candidates for the interest of Media Watch.
Now look, a number of people that we've spoken to have been, of all the Media Watch presenters, David Marr, I think, is probably the most controversial, and maybe it's the times that he was presenting.
Well, I think David Marr was one of the best presenters that Media Watch ever had, because he's such a meticulous and thorough journalist. He has his critics. They're mainly the people who have been exposed on Media Watch, and it's understandable. Being criticised hurts, and journalists are notoriously thin-skinned. So when Media Watch criticises someone, we expect them to come back at us, and it's certainly been the case with The Australian, with The Telegraph, with 2GB, with Alan Jones, with whoever, no matter who it is. I have to tell you, the journalists are not good at being criticised. They can dish it out, but they can't take it.
The criticisms of David Marr being too left-wing, how do you answer that? Was he?
I think we criticised columnists and opinion writers no matter what their ideological view was, and we didn't criticise them so much for their views as for getting things wrong or for stealing other people's work, for being plagiarists. I mean, that's the truth of it. They didn't like it, they complain about it, but the facts speak for themselves. Around that time, we were doing a lot of stories about plagiarism, and we were doing a lot of stories in particular about plagiarism in the Daily Telegraph, and the then editor of the Telly, Campbell Reid, was no doubt sick and tired of us contacting him and saying, well, this journalist has plagiarised this, or that journalist has plagiarised this. And so instead of sending us a letter in reply, I went to the front office, and there was a little foam esky, and inside it there was a small barramundi on ice. And that was Campbell Reid's answer to our latest question about plagiarism. We were never quite sure what it meant. It was just a joke, but straight away we thought, well, look, let's turn this into a trophy. David wanted to get the barramundi stuffed and mounted, but I decided that was rather too expensive, so I just took a photo of the barramundi, and then by then it was getting a bit whiffy, so I fed it to my cat, and we used Photoshop to make our own little plaque, the Campbell Reid Perpetual Trophy for the brazen recycling of other people's work.
What were the culture wars, and what, if any, small part did Media Watch play in them?
Well, the culture wars are what people refer to as a sort of ongoing battle between the right and the left about who controls Australian history, and that's the sort of essence of it. But I mean, it's a sort of rather funny war. It's really a war that's carried on in the newspaper columns, and perhaps to some extent in the universities. So it was an area that Media Watch had to comment on, and I think because a lot of the culture wars are really driven by because the culture wars are led by very ideologically committed individuals, opinion writers and commentators, they're the sort of people who, write their columns angrily, write them off the top of their head, make a lot of mistakes, and so, people would... it's not very well expressed, sorry.
That's okay, it's a tough one.
Mm.
I'll ask you another question around that and then come back to that.
Sure.
Media Watch and David Marr, after 9/11, reacted to a number of important story, the anti-Muslim coverage, the war in Iraq,
Mm-hmm.
etc. Can you talk about those issues that were raised on Media Watch after 9/11?
Well, obviously 9/11 led to a lot more focus and a lot more reporting, a lot more media attention on Islam and on Muslims. A lot of it certainly initially was pretty ill-informed, and so it was material that Media Watch had to have a look at, and people would be making comments about something they really, they hadn't given a moment's thought to before 9/11, and now suddenly they were experts. So we did find that a lot of people were making, pretty poor comments, pretty poor judgments.
Media Watch exposed Janet Albrechtsen at one point. Did Media Watch focus on Janet Albrechtsen because she was a conservative or because she was wrong?
We really didn't know much about Janet Albrechtsen at the time that we did the story. She was just one of a number of columnists that we looked at, but we did find this column, and it had a couple of real howlers in it where she'd misquoted academics, taken their comments, taken them out of context, and completely misrepresented them. And that's what we reported. But it caused an almighty kerfuffle because the Australian just went berserk.
When you say they went berserk, how did they react?
Well, the Australian made it into, a major incident, a sort of ideological confrontation between Media Watch and their columnist. It was just one of a number of stories that we did about columnists who'd got things wrong. But it was the Australians' reaction that really sort of catapulted Janet Albrechtsen into the spotlight.
Now, did Media Watch give the same attention to non-conservative commentators as it did to the Albrechtsens of the world?
We were always on the lookout for left-wing or moderate, or it didn't matter what the ideological stripe was. We were interested in columnists and reporting when they made mistakes. We rely a lot on tip-offs from people, and I'd have to say that there probably aren't as many stories we've done about left-wing commentators getting it wrong as right-wing commentators. But I think it's also true to say that there aren't as many left-wing commentators as there are right.
Now, David Marr says of all the media organisations and newspapers Media Watch criticised, it was the Australian that reacted the most fiercely, that it was the Australian that actually couldn't accept criticism even when it was due. Mm-hmm. Is that your opinion?
Yeah, no, I think the Australian did have a problem with being criticised. They just couldn't believe that they were getting things wrong. And we didn't criticise the Australian any more than anyone else. I'm sure that a lot of other newspapers have copped it a lot worse from Media Watch over the years than the Australian. The Australian in general is a pretty good newspaper and has some very good reporting in it. But like everyone, they make mistakes. Their problem is that when they get caught, they really just can't take it.
Now, to another serial offender, probably one of the most famous, Dave Sluggo Richardson. He was the guy that did Barcelona Tonight. He mocked up being in Iraq. And under Liz exposed him for basically beating up a story on a woman that allegedly wasn't working and had children from all different fathers. I mean, what's the value of exposing someone like Dave Sluggo Richardson?
I think that, in a sense, that story about Sluggo Richardson and the mother with too many children, it's quintessentially what Media Watch is about, because here you have a reporter, a powerful figure in the media, who's a bully, and he's bullying ordinary people. And what Media Watch is about turning the tables on those people and exposing them. And I think that's really what people enjoy about Media Watch, because they finally see someone like Sluggo getting his comeuppance. And Media Watch is a program for media consumers. It's not a program for reporters and producers and journalists. And they've all got their own papers or their programs. They've all got their own voice in the media. It's the readers and the viewers and the listeners who don't have a voice, and who look to Media Watch as a form of redress. When someone writes a story about them that's wrong, when when they're harangued, when they're pulled up in a car park and given a hard time for no good reason, Media Watch is a place you can go to.
The whole cash for comment affair would never have been revealed, is that?
No, I think that's absolutely true. I think cash for comment was a real turning point for Media Watch, because prior to that, I think under Littlemore, Media Watch had been or become a sort of, grumpy old man meets what the papers say. But after Cash for Comment, Media Watch was investigative journalism about the media. It was applying journalism to journalism, using the tools of journalism to uncover what was really going on in the media. And, that was an enormous leap forward.
Well, maybe first of all, can you tell us about the ABC Managing Director's speech to the Sydney Institute and what he was saying about Media Watch?
Yeah. The ABC Managing Director, Mark Scott's comments to the Sydney Institute about Media Watch did take us by surprise, because, the first we heard of it was when the embargoed speech was released a couple of hours before he was due to give the talk. And the comments seemed to indicate that he thought there were significant changes that were needed at Media Watch. Now, in the end, that wasn't the way that it unfolded, but it was certainly, at the time, it was a matter of concern to us that the managing director of our organisation was making these comments about the program, and there didn't seem to have been any level of consultation with us or even with our immediate supervisors.
What was the mood that preceded those comments? Why would he be suggesting that at the Sydney Institute?
Well, I mean, there has been a more or less relentless campaign against Media Watch by prominent figures within the media, prominent columnists who've been criticised by Media Watch, people like Alan Jones, people like Piers Ackerman, people like the editor of The Australian, people who've been unhappy about what Media Watch has been saying and what Media Watch has been doing, have criticised the program, used their own columns to get back and respond to what the program is doing. And I think the pressure of that criticism, had been building up over many years.
But nothing happened, did it? There were no fundamental changes.
No, I think Media Watch, I don't think there were significant changes to Media Watch. Media Watch is still the program now that it was, 5 years ago. It's still a program that's willing to take it up to the media, to criticise what we think is wrong. We investigate the stories, we find out what's happened, we ask the people who are being criticised to respond, and we put those responses out as well. So I think Media Watch has developed into a program that is even-handed, that listens to the other side of the story, but it still puts forward its own analysis, puts forward its own view, and tells the audience what we think about what's happening.
During your 6 years as an EP, did you notice any trends in reporting or changes in the media landscape?
I suppose there are trends that you see. I think there are some trends there. Certainly journalists are being asked to do more and more, probably with less resources, and that's certainly an inducement to people to cut corners. Some things have improved. I think there's less plagiarism now than there was 5 or 6 years ago, largely due to the internet. Google has made plagiarism very easy to do, but also very easy to detect. And so 5, 6 years ago, a lot of people were stealing other people's material. Nowadays, I don't think it's so common. So there are changes, there are developments.
Professor David Flint resigned soon after the reporting of the letter. What impact do you think Media Watch had on the head of the regulator's career?
Well, look, I think a continuing concern at Media Watch has been the standard of media regulation. Media Watch has always been dissatisfied with the media regulators, whether it's the Press Council or the Australian Broadcasting Authority, because the fact is that they don't do a very good job. And David Flint had been a subject of Media Watch all through the time of the program. I think from the time when he was the head of the Press Council through to the time later on when he was the head of the Australian Broadcasting Authority. So it was quite an achievement to finally force his resignation and, you know, to catch him sending fawning letters to Alan Jones.
Now, David Flint said it's possible to be flattering of someone and also recognise their transgressions.
Well, I think the problem is that David Flint's record as a regulator is so very, very poor. He was always on the wrong side as far as Media Watch was concerned. He was always defending the powerful media interests against the interests of consumers, and you know that was never satisfactory to Media Watch. And I think, you know, we criticised him for all the right reasons, and he went for all the right reasons.
Interesting. Now, David Marr very dramatically called Alan Jones a liar. What was that all about? Why such strong words?
I think that was just a fantastic bit of David Marr, really. I mean, it was a David Marr inspiration. Here we are, we've got the evidence, we've got Alan Jones saying, I never said that, and then we've got the recording of Alan Jones saying what he absolutely claims he never said. So we show that he's a liar. But I think David's inspiration was to call him a liar as well. And it really upped the ante and caught people's attention, and you know, I think it changed the way that people looked at Alan Jones. I think, you know, journalists in other countries are completely blown away by the idea of Media Watch, of having a program that investigates what the media is doing, what journalists are doing, how they put their stories together, and criticise them with the facts, and, you know, goes in hard. And when you show it to people, you know, in Scandinavia or in the United States, senior journalists, they say, look, you know, why can't we have a program like that? You know, I think it is a unique program.